when we saw the Associated Press get booted off of Air Force One and out of the Oval Office, what did the White House Correspondents Association do? They put out a strongly worded statement. My God, no, at that point, you need collective action. You need the networks to get together and say, Donald Trump, I know how much you love your pictures and how much you love to get your picture taken. Guess what? You're not going to get these pictures. We're not sending our world-class photographers into the Oval Office. These major news organizations just sort of rolled over this phenomenon of bending the knee that we've seen since Trump has gotten back into the Oval Office. Major corporations, law firms, universities, the press. My God, grow a spine. What the hell is going on? It's a guy who smears orange shit all over his face every day and plays the president of the United States. Why in the hell are you so afraid of this guy?
This is Black Man Spy.
Welcome to another episode, an exciting episode of Black Man Spy podcast. I do not want to spend a lot of time introducing this person because he really needs no introduction. I know I've said that in the last few podcasts, but Jim Acosta is an American icon. If there was ever a person who could claim or we would elevate to say that he is the moral clarion in U.S. news media right now, it's Jim Acosta, because he is no longer in U.S. news media. Like Edward R. Murrow, he has been a very clear voice in the dangers that are coming and the things that are plaguing the United States. But more importantly, he explains why journalism is under attack in this current era that we find ourselves in. So I don't want to waste any more time. He was CNN's chief White House correspondent. He is author of a book, Enemy of the People, the dangerous times for telling the truth. And he is now the host of a Substack that I want you, the minute you're finished here on Black Man Spy, I'll remember you at the end. The Jim Acosta Show on Substack is mandatory. You must watch it if you want true journalism, objectivity, and you want to understand from the Edward R. Murrow of this particularly turbulent period in American history what's going on. His Substack, 100% mandatory. You can sign up for free. You don't have to pay for it, but do go there and hear what he has to say. And without any further ado, let's interview Jim Acosta. Jim, thank you, and welcome to Black Man Spy. I'm a little hoarse right now because I just spent the last 30 minutes shouting my head off on the Stephanie Miller radio show as we discussed whether we are either tiptoeing, sliding, or already on the express train to dictatorship in the United States. Yeah. And she has a way of choosing subjects that just make me really angry.
Like a good host.
And so I've been adopted by given the moniker of Shouty McShoutface. And so
there's a lot to shout about these days. There's no question.
And unfortunately, that laugh is probably going to be the last laugh we have this hour. I had Dahlia Lithwick on last week, and that's as close as I'm going to get to a podcast radio version of Going to Auschwitz. And, when we were discussing the demise of the Supreme Court and the stark, really shocking parallels between, the Supreme Court of 1936, the National Socialist Court, which came from the Weimar Republic. These were very old jurists, and Stephanie Miller's father, who ran as vice presidential nominee to Barry Goldwater, was a prosecutor in Nuremberg on the jurist trials.
Wow.
The trials that were going after the Nazi lawyers who made every law in Nazi Germany legal. And Dahlia and I discussed how Anne Frank was a criminal, that she was hiding. She had not turned herself in. Her father had not registered her as a Jew, had not registered themselves for transport to a death camp. and how they were violating the laws of both Netherlands and occupied Netherlands, and all of the Nazi laws, which were spread out by the German courts to cover any occupied area, and that it was her neighbor, I believe it was a woman, who finally turned them in so that they could legally be transported to Bergen-Belsen, where they could legally die from disease. I think they died from typhoid in the last weeks of the war, just weeks before liberation, along with millions upon millions of other people. And that discussion of the legality of all of the horrible things that were done and that were discussed and openly allowed by saying, the Reichsfuhrer has the ability to do whatever he wants because he has executive authority, and a rubber stamp from the Reichstag, which the German parliament literally was a Nazi party machine, and of course, every other person in the country. Now, I'm going to ask you these questions. I've taken things are so serious that I'm writing my questions down.
That's good.
That's how serious things are. I'm usually pretty happy-go-lucky, and
You're a pro.
I'm not a pro. I've taught interrogation and resistance to interrogation for years.
Yeah.
And so I just know how to elicit the right questions to make people angry or give me information they don't want me to know. But this is information I want our audience to know. And let's just cut right to the heart of it. You come from news media. I do not. I was on MSNBC for 6-7 years. I think I'm what I call a spy who talked on television.
Yeah.
I am not a journalist, even though I've written 10 books. I'm just I transport information. You are a different animal. You are a journalist. You have professional standards, education, and ethics, which go along with the job, which led you to being a guest on Black Man Spy, because you obviously maintained the education standards and ethics, which were important to that job. And so that brings me to my first question. We are clearly living in a time that is unique in the entire 249 years of American history. There has never been a point where a president had this much consolidated power, where we have not a Congress, but a Politburo, arguably, which, not a cabinet, but, a rubber stamp to the decisions of a single individual. And now we find that the Orban/Putin playbook, which is just a repetition of Nazi Germany's and Mussolini's, where now it is the media's turn to be brought into the system, to be made part of the machine, to effectuate whatever plans or designs that this leader, if you want to throw that name in question, has.
Yeah.
Is the media openly complicit, or are they being strong-armed into this?
Wow. Well, Malcolm, first of all, thanks for having me on. And, that is a very important question. And I don't want to disappoint you, but I'm going to give a bit of a nuanced answer.
Nuance away.
I do think that Trump has cracked the code in terms of how to hurt the media. How to hurt the corporate media in this country. Now, we do have independent media in this country. We have folks like you and me doing our thing. And thank God we still have that in this country. And, I would put my life on the line to defend the First Amendment, the free press, the role of independent media in this country. And but we have a different thing going on when it comes to the corporate media in this country. We have a broken information system, as I've been describing it on my podcast and the stuff that I've been writing about over the last several months. When the president of the United States has the ability to bring bogus, ridiculous, bullshit lawsuits against places like ABC and CBS and force those very large companies. I mean, Malcolm, you and I have been around for a while. Those are very large companies, to pay essentially bribes to the president of the United States to make these lawsuits go away, and essentially to grease the skids for media deals. In the case of Paramount, that's exactly what took place. The president has found a pressure point, and he knows how to now bring to bear leverage on these companies. He forced out the president of CBS News. He forced out the executive producer of 60 Minutes. And as I've been saying, when 60 Minutes is in trouble, my God, we're all in trouble in this country. And so I do think to some extent what you have going on in some of these media outlets is that they are looking at what took place over at CBS and ABC and saying, oh, you know what? Wait a minute. Especially in the executive suites, they're saying, oh, gosh, wait a minute. You know, if we push too hard, if we go too far, we ask too many questions, we're going to get a call from the White House. Trump may come after us. And so what you end up with is a situation where I think you have some self-censorship going on. And that, to some extent, does make the corporate media complicit in what the Trump administration is doing in this country. I mean, take a look at what just took place yesterday during the cabinet meeting. This ridiculous situation where, you know, Trump is asked about and Pam Bondi is asked about the Epstein files and the Epstein client list. And Trump jumps in and says, hey, why are you asking this question? And so on. Can we get over this? And, you know, there were a couple of follow-up questions, but my goodness, nothing remotely close to what we did during the first Trump presidency, where we hammered him on all sorts of issues. And if I had been in that cabinet meeting yesterday, I would have said, Mr. President, you said on Fox in 2024 that you want to declassify these files. Your own vice president said 3 weeks before the election, we have to get the client list out there. This is very important. Your own attorney general back in February says the list is on my desk. And the follow-up questions just weren't there. And it just leads me to believe it's because they know if they step out of line or if they feel like they step out of line, the White House is going to come after them. And so, you know, I could go on, but my feeling is, Malcolm, is we have something less than a free press in this country. A lot of free press rights groups around the world, you know, they put those color-coded maps that say, you know, if you're bright blue, you have a free press. And if you're slightly, you know, light blue, you have a little bit less than a free press. And if you're red, like in China or Russia, you have state-controlled media. And so we're somewhere in the middle right now. We have a bit of a state compromise or compromised media in this country that is under the thumb of the President of the United States. We still have independent media. Thank goodness. We still have public broadcasting. And one of the things I've been saying lately, Malcolm, is I would love to see the public broadcasting entities in this country like PBS, NPR be built up to the level where, say, the BBC is or Canadian Broadcasting is in those countries. Make them so big that it makes it extremely difficult for the Republicans to tear them down. Right now, PBS puts out what? 1 hour of news a day, the News Hour, which is a wonderful show. But my goodness, public broadcasting should be putting out a lot more content than what it is right now to combat the right-wing disinformation that we're seeing right now, to combat the BS that we see on Fox. So, I mean, that's a long story short, but I think the media is in a lot of trouble right now. And I think part of it is because, yes, these companies have decided to go along to get along.
You know, that's funny because I'm often asked by my followers, I've got a few million followers, and they say, what's the source of news we should be listening to? What source of news would you get that's objective? And now I have to literally say BBC, France 24, and Deutsche Welle.
Yeah.
I cannot trust.
Work.
They do straight work.
That's right. Straight news.
They do straight news. They're going to give you the facts as you want them. And here I could not say that there was a U.S. media outlet. I was at MSNBC for 7 years. I saw in 2021 the shift to the middle that took place there. That's why I left part of the reason I left MSNBC. First, went and joined the Ukrainian army. That was not handled well by them. I left. I didn't re-sign my contract. And I said, I have something that's more important to me here. Right. And they just couldn't
I remember when I
They
interviewed you during that. I thought it was just terrific that you went over there and did it, Malcolm. You know what Ukraine is going through right
kudos for
now.
me, but they need help. They needed help. And I wasn't a propagandist, right? I humped a rifle for the better part of a year. So, you know, but the problem that I had was you could see that the wave of media initially, as we were going towards the war with Ukraine, they were already becoming more conservative. CNN had its moment with its president. And then when they saw that Zelensky and defense became so popular, they jumped on that and then stepped kept on right up to 2024. Then immediate abdication. My question is this. Is there ever, are we ever going to get to the position where traditional journalists who are in the White House, who are at these press conferences,
Yeah.
are going to reach an enough point? Are they so compromised that rebellion, like standing up and going, "I'm
Yeah.
sorry, Mr. President, that's a load of bullshit, and you need to secure that right here. You're lying to us." Like
Yeah.
we would have
I
done
did. That's how
to
I lost my
Khrushchev.
press pass, Malcolm. I mean,
Yeah, I see that.
when I called him out on, saying we're under invasion in this country and so on at
Right.
that press conference right after the midterms, they got so pissed at me, they took my press pass away. We had to go to a federal judge to get it back. I mean, to some extent, I do worry about my friends in the White House press corps because there are some really good people there who do really good work. But when we saw the Associated Press get booted off of Air Force One and out of the Oval Office, what did the White House Correspondents Association do? They put out sort of a terse letter. They put out a strongly worded statement. My God, no, at that point, you need collective action. You need the networks to get together and say, Donald Trump, I know how much you love your pictures and how much you love to get your picture taken with all that orange shit you put all over your face. Guess what? You're not going to get these pictures. We're not sending our world-class photographers into the Oval Office to take your picture if you boot the Associated Press off of Air Force One and out of the Oval Office. If I had been a bureau chief at one of those networks, I would have said, God damn it, Caroline Leavitt, Donald Trump, you're not going to get away with kicking the Associated Press off of Air Force One and out of the Oval Office. And I'm sorry to report that these major news organizations just sort of rolled over and they said, okay, go ahead and beat up on the little guy. Go ahead and beat up on the Associated Press. Pick on the little kid in class and get away with it. That's the message that they sent. And that's this phenomenon of bending the knee that we've seen since Trump has gotten back into the Oval Office. Major corporations, law firms, universities, the press. My God, grow a spine. What the hell is going on? It's a guy who smears orange shit all over his face every day and plays the president of the United States. Why in the hell are you so afraid of this guy?
Yeah, and what is the purpose of the hagiography? I mean, the New York Times doing things, of this about Elon Musk and insane people like Curtis Yarvin, and talking about how these people run Washington and Trump has the control. This is literally the New York Times article about Adolf Hitler in 1936, only talking rhetorically about the Jews. Yeah. So the news media has a historical path to this. Look, we're already off my list. But
yeah, but I mean, if you look at what was just the hit show in Broadway in New York, Good Night and Good Luck.
Good Night. I was going to say, would you please, for God's sakes, be Edward R. Murrow? But do journalists not go to these shows? Did they not watch the movie?
I think they all were. I mean, you go all over social media. They were all lining up to go to George Clooney's show and have their picture with George Clooney and Good Night and Good Luck and everything. And God bless him for reminding everybody what Edward R. Murrow did during the Red Scare and standing up to McCarthy. That's exactly what we need today. And we don't have it. But that's the example set by people like Murrow, people like Walter Cronkite, people like Dan Rather. And it's just, I don't know. Malcolm, it's just the damnedest thing. I know we're probably strayed from your list of questions, but it is highly depressing to me. And I've been just so totally disappointed in the way corporate media has behaved throughout all of this.
Is it fear? Is it just, it's fear. Let's be honest. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It's fear.
I've worked in I've worked in some pretty bad places on the other side of the world. Iraq, Syria, Libya, all these places, whether they knew I was there or not. Their population was either afraid or proud on either way. We're not talking, are we at a point where people are afraid of having the Saddam Hussein moment? Saddam Hussein used to have these nationally televised, People's Socialist rallies. And then he would come up to the stand, he would say, Joseph Blow, Abdul Blow is a traitor to Syria, to Iraq. And the guy would jump up and he'd be surprised. He was designated sacrificial lamb. And they would, everyone in the audience would start shouting, "Traitor, traitor, traitor!" And the
Yeah.
secret police would come and grab him, would grab him and drag
Well,
him physically out of the audience. Are journalists afraid they are going to have that moment? Or alternatively, here's an even more provocative question. Or because the overwhelming preponderance, 99%, 98% of journalists are white, and they just think that they are going to navigate these rapids because they don't
wow.
actually feel that it's impacting them. They're not Hispanic, they're not Black.
Yeah. Well, I was the first Latino chief White House correspondent at a major network, and I had one of the members of the press corps say to me one time, "I think I know why Trump goes after you. I think I know why." He goes, "It's because you're Hispanic." I had never thought of that before. I had never
Yeah,
actually thought of
me
that
either.
before.
You're
So,
Hispanic?
my dad is Cuban. He's a Cuban immigrant and came over here in 1962, 3 weeks before the Cuban Missile Crisis, as a refugee.
Mm.
And I
Do you, do
approached
you,
this as the son of a Cuban refugee. I don't want this country to become a Castro-like dictatorship. You want to talk about Saddam Hussein?
yeah.
Fidel Castro wasn't that friendly to the press either,
Do you
and
know
or
why
to
I'm
dissidents.
shocked
Yeah,
at you admitting this, or at least exposing this on this channel? Do you know why I'm
yeah.
shocked? Because
Why?
you're a journalist, and I would
Yeah,
never have known that. And your
yeah.
level of professionalism was so profound, I never gave it a moment's thought.
Interesting.
That's why.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I'm running away with that with the rest of these guys.
I do wonder sometimes what is going on, and I think some of it has to do with people just trying to protect their cushy gigs.
Oh,
Uh,
Jesus.
I think some of it is just driven by these media deals and a lot of money that's sloshing around in corporate media, and I do think if you're going to rescue, and we need an information system in this country where people who have been sort of brainwashed by the Rush Limbaughs and the far right talkers like Sean Hannity and Fox News. I mean, what has the damage that has been done in so many far-flung places in this country. And I've traveled all 50 states covering politics. It's pretty extensive in terms of what people will believe. And part of it is because we just don't have we don't have the Ma Bell of information in this country. We
Mm-hmm.
have phone lines running here and there and electrical lines running here and there. We don't have information lines. And I was in Norway earlier this year doing a journalism conference. I was invited to speak there. And I was talking to them about these disinformation issues and so on, how we're drowning in disinformation in the U.S. And part of the discussion boiled down to they don't have Fox in Norway.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So a lot of these countries, you traveled a lot of places, Malcolm, so do I. A lot of these places cannot relate to what we're going through here in the United States because they don't have Fox. They don't have a massive right-wing disinformation megaphone in their faces 24 hours a day. And I think it makes a huge difference. And I think it's part of the reason why we've so veered off course in this country. Unless you solve the quality of the information that people are receiving in America, it's going to be very difficult to pull this country back on track, in my view.
Okay. Well, that being said,
Yeah.
and now we're talking about that we had 76 million people voted against Donald Trump. 89 million people didn't vote. That is the overwhelming preponderance of Americans. He had 31.5-ish percent of the overall adults who could vote voted for him. Almost the same statistic as Adolf Hitler, which is quite surprising. Which tells you something about the psyche of the American mindset. But that being said, you have countries like Britain, which has Sky News, which is a British version of Fox, that talked them into Brexit, which has economically damaged them to the point now where British would gladly rejoin the European Union.
Yeah.
Same thing for a very long while. They had Sky News Australia, which was of course, Rupert Murdoch came from Australia. He was an Australian. I lived in Australia, taught down there for a while. But Australia has set up safeguards now in news media, and disinformation, countering disinformation is a national platform there.
Yeah.
Whereas
the Australians have apologized to the U.S. I mean, you've had Australian politicians apologize to the United States saying, sorry, we gave you Rupert Murdoch. I mean, it's a real thing that's happened in this country. I mean, Fox, if you look at the ratings, Fox News primetime programming, and I say Fox News just to delineate between that and Fox Broadcasting, their primetime programming beats the broadcast networks, the ABC, CBS, and NBCs of the world in terms of what they put out in prime. I mean, it's a big deal. It's a really huge deal. It's something I shout about you talk about at the beginning of this program, shouting McShoutface. I'm shouting McShoutface when it comes to the quality of the information that we have, the quality of the media that we have in this country. It's so terrible. It's just terrible. Yeah.
Well, perhaps it's because let's looking at it operationally from intelligence warfare and psychological warfare. There are information spheres which exist, right? I wrote 4 books about this and how Trump manages to dominate some of these information spheres, which started with the help of the Russians, who had crafted this policy, or this warfare policy, hybrid warfare of seize the information space, recraft information around it using the systems that modern technology has allowed us to. They couldn't do it back when they were the old KGB, right? Teletypes and wires, right? They couldn't do it. This information flowed too slowly. People read newspapers. One of the greatest intelligence tools that I had in my career was the International Herald Tribune newspaper.
Yeah.
It had it was you could sit down and read it, and it was like reading the old Early Bird, right? All the intelligence you needed globally that for your operations was in that paper that day, plus Calvin and Hobbes.
There you go.
You had everything you needed. The world no longer reads newspapers. The world is reduced to, I'm finding myself guilty of this, 30-second shots. The Russians understood that. They assisted Trump. And people always say, are the Russians controlling Trump's information sphere? No, by 2017, Trump and his campaign had run away with it. They had understood the assignment and have taken it completely out of the Russians' hands. And they are creating information spheres with Elon Musk and their other influencers to where ABC News means nothing anymore. CBS News is a legacy organization. You're speaking to an audience much older than me, 65 and above. You're talking to people who are lifeblood is advertisement. Advertisement means middle America.
Yeah.
Right. So as a resistance tool to that, if we're going to capture the information sphere, the only way to do that is through sheer utter disruption. Does there have to be a focused, organized national resistance effort that will target specifically these legacy media channels like ABC, CBS, NBC, and say, here's what's going to happen. You're going to get the target treatment for exactly 90 days. On day X, we want everyone to not just black you out, that when they mention you in social media, it will be negative. When they will go after your specific advertisers. Now, if this sounds familiar, I stole it from World War II. So
some of this is happening. Some of this is happening, Malcolm. I mean, you saw with the Washington Post when Jeff Bezos put the kibosh on the endorsement of Kamala Harris right before the election. A lot of people started to cancel their Washington Post subscriptions. I think they lost something like 250,000 subscribers. You saw you've seen over the last 6 months, some really good people leave the Washington Post. You've seen Jen Rubin go over and start the Contrarian. They basically brought those subscribers from the Washington Post to the Contrarian. And I think it's starting to happen now with Paramount. I mean, I think a lot of people are canceling their Paramount Plus subscriptions as we speak. That has been happening since the fallout of the settlement that came out late last week, which of course they buried during a 4th of July holiday week. I think some of that is starting to happen. I do think you're right. Collective action is what is needed. I also think that these major networks and these major news organizations are looking at models like Substack and looking at what's happening over at YouTube, and they're saying, oh gosh, these places are starting to steal our bacon. And I've already been approached by one network executive saying, "Hey, Jim, can you help me? Can you help us get on Substack?" I'm like, "Wait a minute." I said, "Are you shitting me?" I said, "Are you shitting me?" You guys are in enough trouble as it is. You know, Substack
And
is independent media.
And it's great. And I'm going to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I make double what I made at MSNBC as a contributor. They're
I'm sure
firing.
you do.
I didn't get fired. I left, but leaving, going, and coming back and becoming independent, which now I guess I'm a journalist.
And some of it is telling people, and people are starting to figure this out. You take your subscriber and advertiser dollars, you move them to independent media. You move them to subscription models. And I say to people all the time, you know, you hate ads, I hate ads. Great. Watch on Substack, no ads. Presto, chango. You know?
Yes, and your stuff is deep dive. I don't get shallow. You know, I would on air. We might have 5 minutes total in an hour where we're really speaking. People who want to read a 1,500 word article by me or watch a 10-minute video of me shouting on a targeted subject, or do a live space like I do with Michael Cohen and Lev Parnas, you know, our two felons and a spy. People go and they want,
and people love it, and they want more of it. That's what I've found. And, you know, they're energized by it. And I try to, you know, I used to love the old Tim Russert show, not Meet the Press, but he had another show where he would do like these 30-minute conversations with people. And I used to love that show. And I try to model that with what I do. I try to do these deep dive discussions. We should definitely have you come on. And I enjoy it because you're right. In the cable news model or broadcast news model, by the time you introduce the person, you get through the first couple of questions, the producer's already in your ear saying, wrap, we got to go. Sorry, commercial breaks coming up, blah, blah, blah. We don't have any of that shit now. We can just keep talking until basically we have a headache, which is what happens with me.
But let's just be honest. Yeah. I mean, we don't have, when I say we, I mean everyone who is part of the coalition that does not support Donald Trump and this path to dictatorship. Yeah. So where are the billionaires within our sphere that can monetize this and say, One American News Network came out of thin air overnight and was put on cable instantly.
Yeah. You know, one of my favorite things to say is that old line from Jurassic Park, nature finds a way. And the rich guys will go where the money is going. And they're going to see independent media. They're seeing what's happening on YouTube. I'm telling you, over the next couple of years, Malcolm, when people are sort of taking a break from politics a little bit right now, they're paying attention right now, but they're going to really be paying attention when January 1st of 2026 rolls around. And as we march to January 2029, and that time period is going to be a hyper intense period, and you're going to see the rich guys, the hedge fund guys, all of those big mover and shaker guys want to chase the almighty dollar. And if that money is flowing towards independent media, they're going to want a piece of that action. And that's when you're going to start to see, I think, the marketplace change a little bit. And you might see the ABCs, the NBCs, the CBSs say, you know what, maybe we can't be as full of shit and scaredy pants of Donald Trump. You know, if Malcolm and Jim are given a hard time and doing quite well for themselves, well, maybe we need to be more like those guys. I just think that I'm not a pure capitalist, or I don't want to get that message across or anything like that. But I do think, you know, you're already starting to see some of the networks that we've mentioned during this discussion. Hey, why don't we have one of our main stars host a podcast? It's happening.
But that's ersatz stuff, right? That's just fake. That's just you saying, I want to move down to your sphere and let's throw on, you know, Jake Tapper or somebody like that. This is not a place you can fake it. Okay.
No, that's true. That's true.
I follow your podcast. I watch your podcast. I threw Jen Rubin money in the first instant that I heard the Contrarian came out.
I love those guys.
Because, you know, but explain to me why there are not 40 other journalists moving over there. Why are they not an independent online newspaper? Why are they not so big they can challenge the Washington Post? Is it just that we consume enough to where we're satisfied? Or journalists, I mean, nothing against them. It's the other journalists I have a problem with. I'm a member of the National Association of Black Journalists. Got to be. And take great issue at every punch that's being pulled now. There's been
Yeah.
better black journalism during the Civil War than there is right now as American democracy goes down in flames. How do we get those other journalists to come on board?
Yeah, gosh, you're asking the $1 million question there, Malcolm. I do wonder if at some point, enough is enough for some of these journalists, and they decide they've got to fight back. The problem is that so many of them are, keeping themselves quite busy with Donald Trump being the master of chaos. And, I had Ryan Priebus tell me years ago that Donald Trump, he whips up chaos at all times because he likes to be at the center of the chaos so he can control the chaos. And, just as we're getting going with this Epstein story and trying to get to the bottom of the Epstein story, he tries to light another fire somewhere else. And, now the press has to run over and cover this thing over there. I mean, to some extent, I think as much as we might want to crap on our colleagues in the press, a lot of them, I think, are genuinely trying to do good work. It is but the structure, and this is what I was talking about earlier, the structure that we are all sort of trapped in this country that is dominated by corporate media, that's what has to change. If PBS and NPR had the kind of budget that ABC, NBC, and CBS had, my God, that would really change the equation in this country. If some of the folks that are independent media, places like Substack and YouTube, can somehow form their own network that can compete and make the cable newsers a little scared of their shadow, that I think would have an impact. And so some of this, I hope, evolves over time. I agree with you. There are huge, huge problems. I'm not convinced that every single journalist is, hopelessly lost. Maybe I'm a little bit too romantic about my own profession. I think that there's still hope.
Perhaps not hopelessly lost, but certainly, as you said, they've got a day job. All right. And their day job involves them having to pay the rent in Washington, D.C. Right. So if you're living up in Adams Morgan or, some other place where you've got to shell out $3,000 a month just to cover the White House. Also, you have this, we all know the prestige factor, of being in the White House correspondence pool or even being at the Washington Post. My contention, which I said it a few moments ago, was I think we're at the point where we're going to have to financially punish people. Like, not
you
just
might be
say,
right. And part of this is because, and you might be onto something, because it's not the individual journalists who have to pay the rent in Adams Morgan. It's their bosses, and they have to stiffen their spines. They have to have a little steel in their spines in all of this, because yes, when such and such reporter asks the pointed question in the White House briefing room or in the Oval Office that pisses off Caroline Leavitt and Donald Trump, makes them want to tear their hair out or their hair extensions out, I'm sorry. That's the way it goes. And if the White House gets pissed and calls this bureau chief or that president of this news company or whatever, and is, going off and threatening and everything, you know what you say? That person was doing their job. I told them to do. I told them to ask that question. My old boss, Jeff Zucker, at my old place, was extremely supportive of the work that I did. And he would all the time say, listen, we've got your back. People there would say, we have your back. You got to have that in the corporate executive offices of these companies, or you're going to continue to see sort of this mamby-pamby, Mr. President, asking these sort of obsequious questions that don't really get to the heart of the matter. He is a threat to this country. He has to be treated as such. He is a threat to democracy. He has to be asked questions that get to the heart of those issues. It can't be about, so what are you going to do today? Gosh, what are you going to do about Vladimir Putin? Those questions are bullshit. They don't do anything. And, my mom used to tell me, don't be let others be the wallflower. She would say, let others be the wallflower. We need a little bit more of that spirit, in the people who cover the White House right now, because the stakes are as high as you were saying earlier. The stakes are as high as they've ever been in this country.
Okay, but I don't understand this from corporate side. Now we're going to go into the inner workings of where we were both contributors. But I don't understand how NBC and the president of MSNBC don't understand that there is a market. There is a market that is just shy of the market that Fox had.
Yeah.
In the run up to the presidential election, and it wasn't because, I worked in terrorism and I have 6 TVs in the house. All right. I had my television on 24/7 practically at
Yeah.
some point in so that I can consume the information that I need to make proper decisions. Those people walked away from that delivery system, that market, from MSNBC. I'm going to be honest with you. Haven't
Yeah.
watched not 30 seconds of MSNBC that
Yeah.
was on air since the day of the election. And to be quite honest, it was the day that Scarborough went to Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah.
I also was a regular on Bill Maher.
Yeah.
Bill Maher. I think people see the flow of power. It's like watching a river, and it appears calm, but people can actually see where the
Yeah.
strongest flows are there, and they want to hitch that ride to that flow because there's clearly devotion at that point, and at
Yeah.
the end of devotion, there's money. I mean, these people
Yeah.
are being rubed left and right. And my question here is simply this. How could you walk away from 76 million people, right? Fire your top black contributor host, fire your morning Latino host, purge it of your Asian Pacific Island host, and then get rid of, and I'll be honest with you, most black male contributors have dropped out of there quietly, have been dropped out quietly. When MSNBC would have those Brady Bunch pictures with 6
Yeah.
contributors and a host on there, that was their single most popular time. It was
Yeah.
raking in money. Somebody doesn't like money suddenly?
It's the damnedest thing, but a lot of this, and there's only so much evidence that I can point to. And to me, the settlements paid by ABC and CBS, I mean, Paramount and Disney, I guess to be specific, those are exhibit A and B. And you have to assume that Donald Trump and his people are going to every network in this country, every major newspaper in this country, and applying pressure. And not only to the executives, to the major figures at those news organizations, and they're applying major pressure. And what you're seeing, I think, play out in the press right now is, individuals are kind of showing their true colors. And I have to tell you, Malcolm, I have been personally deeply disappointed in some of the actions and behaviors of some of the individuals that are major figures in this country in media, and how they've behaved since Donald Trump came back into the White House. When he comes into the White House for the second time around, and the very first thing that he does is pardon and commute the sentences of the January 6th rioters and thugs. That, to me, right there off the bat, tells you we're just in a different world. We left Joe Biden land, where, yes, the president was a little sleepy. There's no question about it. But for Christ's sake, he wasn't a danger to this country. And at that point, the major figures at the major news organizations and news outlets in this country needed to stiffen their spines. And what we've seen since then is a lot of bending the knee. This has been the year of like the knee pads. And to me, I could not be, I'm right there with you, Malcolm. I could not be more just absolutely disappointed and furious and pissed at some of the behavior that I've seen since all of this has taken place. But all I can tell you is they are applying major heavy duty pressure on all of these institutions. And we are seeing, and we saw this during the first administration, a buckling. What did Lisa Murkowski say? We are all afraid. We are all afraid. Well, I'm not afraid. And Malcolm, I know you're not afraid. But for crying out loud, if you're a United States senator, what are you afraid of? You are part of one of the 3 co-equal branches of government. My God, have a spine. There's so many people in this country. Stop running scared. If you want this country to stop going down if it concerns you at all to see these masked, militarized Border Patrol agents on horseback marching through MacArthur Park in Los Angeles and they had to, and Mayor Karen Bass shows up, and they have to hurry the kids inside some building because they're all so terrified of this crazy militarized horseshit in the second largest city in this country. And when those types of things are happening in this country, Malcolm, I'm sorry, the major figures, the people who are leading the leading institutions of this country, they have to be standing tall and standing strong. This is no time to be bending the knee.
Well,
Trump
if
has
you
got
had
another
told
$80 billion to supercharge ICE, to do more of this crazy shit for the next 3 years.
yeah,
The leaders of this country, you just have to stop bowing down to this guy, or this
yeah,
behavior, I guarantee
we're,
you, will get worse.
we're gonna talk about the secret police here
Yeah.
shortly. Oh my
Yeah.
God, I can't believe after nearly 40 years of doing this, and I'm using
Yeah.
the phrase secret police in the United States, but here we are.
Yeah.
But if you had told me last year that fealty, all right, literally bending a knee, fealty to a national leader would become the defining trait of journalism, and whether you're will ever remain a corporate, local, or national journalist, I would have laughed in your face because, of course,
Yeah.
everyone wants to be Edward R. Murrow. Everyone wants to be the person that speaks to power. But if power knows that you're not gonna be buying croissants at Tate Cafe on M Street
Yeah.
on your way down to the White House, and that you're just
Yeah.
going to be sitting in your basement wondering if you could get more than 15,000 free subscribers on Substack, that makes fealty look a little better. Also, I know we're going round and round on the media's complicity here. So to jump off of it, I have a quick question. Who was the current American version of Lord Haw Haw, which was in Nazi Germany had a British propagandist named Lord Haw Haw. They also had a woman whose name was Axis Sally. And of course,
Yeah.
Japan had Tokyo Rose. So we have a corporate media. That corporate media in Russia, I know who they are, right? Soloviev, they are not Maria Butina. I'm sorry, it's a woman who actually played my segment on Russian state TV. And they have key figures. I mean, who is America's most, how can I put it, boot-licking media personality in corporate media now?
Well, you've got a lot of contenders in that category, but I would, I would say that probably Sean Hannity would take that title. I think he's the king of primetime over at Fox, and he is, and perhaps before that was Tucker Carlson. I would say that Tucker has probably shown a little more independence lately than I, expected from him, which has been kind of interesting. But Sean Hannity goes out of his way
in a bad way. All right, that's like saying, "Hey, listen, I was shilling for Mussolini, but I'm going full Bernard now, y'all." That's
believe me, Tucker. Tucker and I have gone after each other over the years. I don't know him at all. He's just, he's a mystery wrapped in an enigma. But Hannity, by and large, to me, one of the more shameful things that I've ever witnessed in my career in news was right after January 6th, when it was starting to come out that, Hannity and some of these folks were texting with Mark Meadows, the White House chief of staff, and other people over at the White House, and saying, Trump better stop this. The 25th Amendment, he's got to stop talking about the election and so on. These people knew inside Fox. This is what I'm talking about, how dangerous this is. People like Laura Ingraham. I used to see Laura Ingraham show up at White House events all the time when I was White House correspondent. And she wasn't there as part of the press corps. She was there to sit among the dignitaries invited to Donald Trump events by the White House. Laura Ingraham, who was a host on Fox.
So was Leni Riefenstahl.
Well, and the parallels are quite staggering. I mean, there's something to behold. And so when these folks, they recognize how dangerous Donald Trump was around that 2020 election in January 6th, and then they go right back to cheerleading him back into the Oval Office and are now once again his chief propagandist. Malcolm, you and I both know years from now, that footage, the footage of them being bootlickers, being lapdogs for this seriously undemocratic, dangerous president, it's just going to be just, a shameful thing, a cloud that hangs over their legacy, if you want to call it that, but that hangs over Fox for all eternity. I mean, they are. I coined the term the bullshit factory when I was an anchor at my old place. Fox is almost more dangerous than just being a bullshit. Bullshit, sort of like, oh, your crazy uncle who spews bullshit at the end of the bar. Ha ha ha! He's a bullshitter. It's much more. It's worse than that now. They're a propaganda. They're as much like state television as you would see in any other autocratic society. And to me, it is a tragic shame what they've become. And I don't know. I've offered some suggestions on your show as to how to combat that. But to me, unless you stand up and build up an apparatus, an information system, an information infrastructure in this country that can rival that, we're just going to be really sort of cemented in this sort of, Earth 1 versus Earth 2 kind of world. And it's tragic.
And that brings to mind that, 2 points. One, it's that I really hope that these clips are shown and that they are compiled into, a loop tape
Yes.
of them being complacent and actually talking America into whatever is happening here at a future, what I would call the Plattsburgh trials, right? Some future war crimes trial that'll be held, because I think this is taking us into a bad way. One of my missions that, so hopefully, if my memoir ever makes it off of Pete Hegseth's desk, where it's been for a year now, we'll talk about, I was involved in the Operation Sapphire non-combatant evacuation from Rwanda. And Radio Mille Collines, which was the national propaganda kill your neighbor network, featured very highly in my book, They Want to Kill Americans, which was about the Trump propaganda machine moving people towards violence. But, and hopefully that will be, people can be held to account. But I don't have any compunction, any feeling that other journalists will ever do this. I confront people when they come here. I had it out with Tucker Carlson once. For some strange reason, he made some comment about this MSNBC contributor. And I immediately went out on Twitter and was like, if I ever see you on the street, I will physically beat your ass. Never heard from him. Never. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if people understand that your speech, you can ring that bell in the fire, inside the theater, but the last guy in that theater may be waiting for you as you come out with the satisfied look. Fox News is equated, as far as I'm concerned, they remind me of that great scene in the movie The Naked Gun, where the murderer is relieved who's going to kill kill Chief Drebin. And he goes, I'm going to rip his head off and shit down his windpipe and use his eyes as fingers for a bowling ball. And the journalists are all there with their mics. And the one journalist finally speaks up and goes, are you a good bowler? And the next guy goes, have you ever bowled at 300? And that's all the journalists want to talk about is his bowling scores, because that's where U.S. news media has come down to now. They have elevated the figure who could be a mass murderer, who might kill people, to the point where they are less of an important story than their backstory, which could further more people eyeballs to their channel. Look, we're not even off question one. So one last question. Before we go, why are Trump's mass rallies failing? Why are his military spectacle, the parade, why did they fail on every channel except Fox News?
It's a really good question. And I to some extent, I mean, I think we're already dealing with Trump fatigue, and not just with people like you and me. I think across the country, people are, his polling is in the toilet. Even on immigration, things aren't looking so good. I think there was just a very tiny segment of the electorate that said, "Okay, we don't like inflation, Biden seems too old, and I don't know who Kamala Harris is. Oh, but you know what? I'm just going to vote for the TV guy again.
Right.
And I do think there were just enough people were snookered at that particular moment. You know, you take the election, you have the election 2 weeks earlier, 2 weeks later, you might have a different result. I don't know. He might not have won, but enough people were snookered to give him another shot. And they said, wait a minute, what's with the pardoning of the January 6 people? Wait a minute. You said you're going after the criminals and the gang members. You're scooping up grandma and the guy that is a day laborer at the Home Depot. That's not what I had in mind. You're deporting little kids with cancer. That's not what I had in mind. And I just think, you know, I sat back and saw this coming over a year ago. I thought, yes, he could win re-election. There's no question in my mind. And part of it is because of the hold that he has on his base. They still show up at his rallies. Not as many people showed up for his military dictator birthday bash down on the mall. But, you know, MAGA is still there for Donald Trump. It's still a potent political force in this country. What happens now with this Epstein stuff that is percolating? That is a very interesting development. We'll have to wait and see what happens with that. But by and large, I think a lot of Americans have said, I just don't want to deal with this guy. I don't want to deal with this clown. And I think there's a tune-out factor with him. And
but
if there's one thing that makes him crazier than anything is when his ratings aren't so good. Take it from me.
He now has control of the levers of power for the next 3.5 years. You
can do a lot of damage. There's no question. I mean, when the Supreme Court is rolling over, if if President Kamala Harris had said, I want to start shutting down departments and agencies of the federal government, what would that 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court have said? They would have said, no fucking way are you doing that.
They won't.
There's no way that they would have allowed Kamala Harris to shut down departments and agencies of the federal government unilaterally.
Right.
But they are letting Donald Trump do it because it is a MAGA Supreme Court. And when the Supreme Court loses its aura of impartiality, which is what really any court in the United States should have, but the Supreme Court more than anything else, then people start to lose faith in institutions and people start to tune out. And I do believe some of that is starting to settle in. And I think the pump has been primed for somebody, and I don't know if it's a Mamdani type, somebody to take this country by storm in a way that we saw with Barack Obama in 2008, because I think people already are ready for a radical, and I don't mean politically, but just a very dramatic departure from the status quo. They have lost. They do not trust Donald Trump. They think he's a creep. They think he's a jerk. They think the Congress, as you were saying earlier, they're just completely, they just weak in the knees, can't get anything done. There are some Democrats, yes, who are fighting the good fight, no question about it. And then the Supreme Court as an institution, they've eviscerated, the John Roberts Court has eviscerated its credibility. He has done colossal damage to the Supreme Court. There's just no question about it. I mean, he just has done it. I think that is part of the reason why you're seeing people say, I don't want to watch these. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I want to disengage.
I saw a great political cartoon that said that Donald Trump being elected the first time was like giving a child a loaded gun. And then in 2020, we took the gun away from him. And in 2024, we said, let's give him a fully automatic rifle and see what happens.
Yeah.
That's where we are. I often refer to him as a drunk monkey with a AK-47 dancing to YMCA. We are at a point, my take, and it's that we're headed to a very dangerous place. And I don't think people are going to be able to tune out with as much devastation as already happened. I mean, we're at 130 days 140 days into this.
Yeah.
People are dying,
Yeah.
and America is already losing its rights. A mass
Yeah.
protest movement has come up. We're almost hitting that 3.5% mark, which staggers me. How
Yep.
50% of Kamala Harris voters are not on the street. That would be 35 million Americans. We
Yeah.
could shut this country down. We could call for
Well,
the
people have been
government to
demoralized.
resign.
No, Malcolm, people have been demoralized, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again.
Mm,
I'm not, they say there's Trump derangement syndrome and so on, which is a
mm,
total crock of shit.
right.
What is a real thing is Trump depression syndrome. And I tell this when I talk to audiences, when I go do live events, I talk about it on my show from time to time, and I'll say it here. If people get so down in the dumps that they think that there's nothing really that can be done and that it's over and this fascist oligarchy has won, then what are we all doing here? You can't give up so easily. I mean, and Malcolm, I mean, my God, you picked up a rifle, you went off to Ukraine and fought with their resistance. God bless you for doing that. But for the people out there who feel as strongly about things as you do, and I describe it as, let's not talk about it as like, let's fight for democracy and so on. That's all well and good. That's important. Let's fight for the American way of life, the way of life that you and I grew up with. It's the reason why you became a spy. It's the reason why I became a journalist. It's because this means something. It's important. And my concern is that there are so many people, and it's exactly what you're saying. And is it Charlemagne the God that was talking about losing people to the couch?
Right.
Not to go JD Vance, but fuck the couch. You know what I mean? Like I'm sorry, but folks, we're going to laugh before the end of this. Folks, get up off your asses and do something. No King's Day is every day. It's not just June 14th. And I'm with you, Malcolm, on that the threat is there and it could be much more serious. I have not given up on our fellow Americans just yet. I have not given up on them, but I do want them to get up off their asses a little bit more than where they are right now, if I may say that.
Absolutely. I'm a son of Philadelphia, born and raised around Independence Hall, born in a naval hospital, to a family that spent a century and a half defending this country. My problem right now is not that we're not mobilizing. My problem is that people are not seeing that we need, in my opinion, a second American Revolution, a peaceful second American Revolution, to save the values of the first one. Because for all their 1776, we the people bullshit talk, it's we the people would like to be the Soviet Union. We the people would like to be, the Fourth Reich. That's where I have a problem with it.
Me too, man. Me too.
Well, thank you so much for coming on Black Man Spy. Went way past the 30 minutes that I wanted to have with you. We got to question number one, but it's important. It really means a lot to me to hear from a person who's a real journalist. And I have only ever considered you a real journalist. Didn't know anything about your background, didn't know about anything else other than left, right, center. You did what was right. And that's where I hope that you can help bring your fellow compatriots who are still in the system along.
I appreciate it, Malcolm. Thanks a lot. And let's do it again soon.
All right. Take care.
All right. You as well.
That was an exciting interview. And what I find most interesting about that interview is I had 8 questions and we got into question 1.2. That is how deep the subject of the compromise of journalism and the media in the United States is now. Media and harnessing the information sphere and keeping the psychological and propaganda pressure up on your population is important to autocrats, dictators, potentates, and wannabe warlords. And that's why we find people like Viktor Orban and Vladimir Putin immediately seize control of the news media. Then the next place they go to is the universities and education to keep control of their population from learning information. Information is a warfare tool. It is the most important tool that you have in navigating the world. And if you become a person, as we said, Jim mentioned Charlemagne the God, the podcaster, who said we become captives to our couches, then we are in dangerous trouble. And there's nothing worse than watching the world be set on fire from your couch and think, that's an interesting thing that's going on. I wonder what they're saying about it on Twitter or X, while your whole world burns down around you. This nation is in danger. And he has spelled out some of those dangers from corporate media in a way that I'm so proud to have had him on this show. I look up to him. I'm not a journalist, the way educated journalists are, but I am part of the news media world now. And, it's important that we hear from people who are true heroes. And he is a true hero by speaking his mind and informing us and telling us that the king is not wearing any clothing. Thank you, Jim Acosta, for being on this show. Please subscribe to his Substack, The Jim Acosta Show on Substack. With that, we are going to go into our final pearl of wisdom. Usually we end the show with a quote by Rudyard Kipling, but I've now expanded that because even though Kipling was a brilliant mind, and I'm a member of the Kipling Society and have been for many years as a soldier spy / lover of poetry and common sense, today I'm going to give you a reading from a book that I found in a small English bookstore in Vienna, Austria, of all places. And that book is called Nazi German in 22 Lessons, or How to Speak Nazi German in 22 Lessons. And what it is that there are phrases which became very common during World War II in the rise of Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany, to the right now are part of the generic political lexicon: unneutral behavior, collaboration, right? No further territorial ambitions. Who's the last guy I heard that from? Vladimir Putin, right? And I like this. The book, the book defines each one of these key phrases. And I was not going to mention this, but I did just talk about lesson 20: no further territorial ambition, right? Which the book defines, which was an actual phrase that was constantly used in Nazi German propaganda and news media as a conversational phrase, meaning I intend to invade tomorrow. Well, that's exactly what Vladimir Putin said for Ukraine. But today's phrase of the day is coming from lesson 22 of Nazi German in 22 Lessons. And that phrase is the atmosphere of cordiality, or as they say in German, right? Ein herzliche Atmosphäre, right? The definition of atmosphere of cordiality is when two men conclude an agreement to the satisfaction of one of them, the other having a gun and his ribs. The discussion is said to have taken place in an atmosphere of cordiality. And that's what's happening in America in the news media. Many people who are in media, who are in journalism, who are in broadcast news, are trying to both sides the descent that we're having into American autocracy, or as I called it in the plot to destroy democracy, constitutional autocracy, where the Constitution and laws are given to one side and the other side has a gun in their ribs and are expected to maintain an atmosphere of cordiality. And that herzlichen Atmosphären is exactly what many journalists find themselves intimidated into as they are harassed, bullied, threatened, and even having their lives as well as their livelihoods threatened. We have to understand that we are no longer in a position where we can accept the atmosphere of cordiality. If we are true patriots, if you're like me, my son of Philadelphia rant, you are going to stand up to that and say, I'm sorry. You're not going to sit here and insult me, insult my family, insult our history, and worse, insult my intelligence by trying to maintain a both sides does it atmosphere of cordiality. And we've seen people like Chuck Todd Jake Tapper and others fall into that trap, and they allow the dictatorship to co-opt this good spirit to do bad things to people who don't deserve it. And on that unhappy and relatively sad note, I just want to thank you for tuning into this week's Black Man Spy. As you can see, they're getting more serious. We're meeting more in-depth guests due to the severity of the situation that we find ourselves in. But please subscribe to Jim Acosta Show on the Jim Acosta Show on Substack. You can follow me on Substack on my special intelligence Substack at malcolmnance.substack.com. You can watch on YouTube on the Black Man Spy podcast. You can hear the Black Man Spy podcast on Apple, Stitcher, and all of your other fine podcast spaces around the world. And in fact, it's translated into other languages with subtitles in Denmark, I have since found. So thank you again. I will see you next week. I will be reporting from a secret location. And with that, please tune in. Maintain your dignity, maintain your strength. This country has not folded, and we are the resistance, and we will take back the decency and the dignity that is befitting the United States of America. Bye-bye.